Hi, I'm Isabelle Morton, founder of the Gemstone Therapy Institute. In this video, I'm going to introduce the theory behind a completely new and original way to use color for healing. The theory involves the spectrums of color that feed and also constitute, at a very fundamental level, every living thing. This understanding allows you to reliably measure these 7 color spectrums that underlie both health and wellness and illness, and then evaluate these spectrums so that you can understand what may be going on in your body, or if you're a practitioner, your client's body. Once you know the relationships of the colors in the spectrums, you can take precise and meaningful and significant steps on your journey to greater health. There's no guessing involved. Gemstone color ray therapy brings science to energy healing. Since this information is the result of my original research, you won't find it anywhere else except in bits and pieces. I originally brought out the idea of color ray testing and color ray theory in the late 1980s, but I always felt as though I was missing certain very important pieces. The information just didn't add up. Something just wasn't right. Then about 20 years later, I had one breakthrough after another and everything started to make sense. Color ray theory is so exciting to me, and let me tell you why. Because the more we understand about it, the more we find that color ray spectrums help explain how the universe works. They help explain how life works, why people are attracted to each other, and how cause and effect works. Because the thing is, if we can evaluate the spectrum of something that's bothering us and then change that spectrum, then our experience must also change. Do you get how amazing that is? If you change the spectrum, the experience that spectrum represents also changes. Your experience changes. This is huge. In the course of the healing process, a spectrum will change from one expression to another. But what if we could speed up that process by evaluating the spectrum and then urging those changes gently along? It means that we finally have a natural way to take control of our health. After we apply first aid, we no longer have to let time alone do the healing. We can take active steps to encourage our body's own ability to self-heal and to direct that self-healing. All we have to do is learn to identify the spectrum involved with our condition and learn to do the spectrum balancing method. Color ray theory is also based on the idea that all life is both physical and energetic. On one hand, we have the physical presence of our body and the physical presence of the world around us. On the other hand, we have the energetic presence of our body and the energies of the world around us. These are like two halves of a whole, and that whole is you. Most healing modalities today focus on the physical presence. Science excels at studying, dissecting, and learning how to measure, evaluate, and cure the physical presence. Color ray theory and gemstone color ray therapy focuses on the energetic presence. As above, so below applies here, but not exactly, because physical symptoms are like the tip of an iceberg. The hidden part below the water's surface, as you know, is much, much bigger. It represents the energetic causes and contributing factors of those physical symptoms. The energetic has by far a larger presence and impact than what you can see on the surface. Now, let's take a look more closely at these color ray spectrums that I'm talking about. These are the spectrums of life-giving energy that allow us to self-develop, self-heal, self-maintain, and self-regulate. To work with them, you have to view them in a special way. Spectrums are usually mapped out like this. To work with color ray spectrums, you have to view the spectrum like this. The distinction is important. I'm not saying that the color frequencies that make up the electromagnetic spectrum are the same as the color rays that feed the body. On the contrary, there is a difference. Color frequencies can be seen everywhere you look, the result of how ambient light interacts with physical matter. This color is not necessarily life-giving unless maybe a certain color makes you feel good or reminds you of pleasant memories. Color rays are life-giving. They are what differentiates the living from the not living. When you die, you take your life energy and your color rays with you. I'm going to digress just for a moment to say that the body has natural ways of bringing in these color rays. There are natural flows that move towards you and away from you. There are also natural flows that move in through the chakras. We can also bring color rays in through eating, drinking, and breathing. But in this case, the body has to transform the color frequencies into something it can use. The spectrums get enlivened in the process of digestion and in the process of respiration. Color ray theory sees this spectrum in two parts: a resonance spectrum, which we denote on the left side, and an experience spectrum on the right. Life is made up of resonant spectrums upon resonant spectrums. Our living atoms have resonance spectrums that combine to form living molecules which have their own resonance spectrums. Molecular spectrums combine to form the resonance spectrums of cells, etc. Our body as a whole also has a resonance spectrum, and so do our chakras. More correctly, every part of us, from our atoms to our molecules, cells, chakras, and our body as a whole, can be explained and described and mapped out energetically by its resonance spectrum. Our emotions, memories, thoughts also have resonance spectrums. But resonance spectrums are only half the picture, because every resonance spectrum will call in an experience spectrum. The experience spectrum is denoted on the right side of the graphic. The type of experience spectrum that's called in is designated by the kind of resonance spectrum, and it's nearly opposite. It fits the spectrum closely, but rarely exactly. If it did fit perfectly, you'd get a cure, or a complete resolution of an issue or condition. In most cases, you have to work up to that through one experience after another, after another, after another. The experience spectrum represents the experiences that the resonance spectrum calls in. This can be a mixture of the spectrums of atoms, molecules, and cells. More often, it's a combination of the spectrums of emotions, memories, and thoughts that combine with the physical to give a person an experience. It could be an experience of pain, stiffness, or health. There's one more thing you need to know, and then I'll show you some examples of how this works. So in order to talk about this, we have to know the names of key color rays in the resonance spectrum. The color in least amount is always called the primary ray. The primary ray is responsible for drawing in an experience. The more deficient the primary ray is, the stronger its draw. Its need is greater because it's resonance spectrum's job to call in the life-giving energy to nourish and sustain the anatomy it's associated with. If that anatomy is deficient, that shows up in the color ray spectrum. The primary ray becomes deficient too. And so it does its best to call in the life-giving color ray nourishment that it needs. Some spectrums have a limiting ray. This is a color ray that dominates a resonance spectrum. It's called a limiting ray because it does limit the types of experiences that can come in. Limiting rays are very important to identify and correct because their presence can keep away, almost at arm's length, it can feel like, the very experience of health that we want to have. So people who struggle dearly trying to make changes or let go of habits or do something or feel something different, but they just can't, it's likely they have limiting rays in key spectrums in their life. If it feels as though you've hit a brick wall every time you try to take a step forward, likely you have a limiting ray and key spectrums somewhere in your body. So here's an example of a resonance spectrum. It could be of a cell, an organ, or even an emotion. Let's say it's the spectrum of a person's body as a whole. You can't really tell just by looking at this spectrum what it relates to, but you can choose what spectrum you're testing when you do an evaluation. So in any case, we can see that this spectrum is relatively deficient in life-giving energy. Here's a spectrum that's definitely depleted. The more depleted the colors in a resonance spectrum become, especially the primary ray, the more dramatically it's going to call in experiences. This spectrum might call in the common cold in order to call in the experiences of needed rest and replenishment in order to balance the spectrum. While this spectrum might call in a very bad cold or maybe the flu. The rest, remedies, and attention given to the person help balance out the spectrum so that it can return to a spectrum that's stronger, more nourished, and more resilient. If the person's resonance spectrum looked like this, with a limiting ray, then no matter what the person does, no matter how much rest and remedies she takes, that cold is going to linger. I hope you can see how invaluable this information is. Working with color ray theory is going to help you on your healing journey when you want to take more responsibility for your own health in natural ways that complement the guidance your healthcare professional gives you. If you are a healthcare professional, then applying this information is going to give you new insight into what's going on with your clients and patients. With color ray testing, you can determine how long it might take for someone to start feeling better based on how relatively depleted the spectrums are that are associated with the client's condition. You can also track progress from one visit to the next by spectrum testing. You can also get a sense of how well a certain remedy or treatment is going to work based on how significantly the spectrum shifts while the client is still in your office. And you can help shorten the client's healing journey by balancing any limiting rays that you might find. To learn how to test and evaluate color ray spectrums using the spectrum balancing method, I've prepared 3 home study courses. Color Ray 105, Spectrum Balancing the Body, teaches you how to do color ray testing, how to locate which area to test, and how to evaluate the spectrum you find, and how to do the spectrum balancing method. But because you can't do color ray testing without the tool to do the test, we give you the tool as a bonus for taking the course. It's called a color ray test circle, and you will need it to evaluate each of the 7 colors in the spectrum. The color ray circle contains one each of the color ray bearing gemstones: ruby, carnelian, yellow sapphire, emerald, blue sapphire, indigo, and amethyst in a bed of white beryl. These are the best gemstones to use for color ray testing because they resonate with the resonance spectrum you're testing and can give you accurate results. After you've learned the skills taught in Color Ray 105, you can take Color Ray 106, Spectrum Balancing Life Issues. Here, you'll learn how to measure the spectrum of issues and conditions that have no direct physical connection, such as financial issues, relationship issues, career issues, and even your goals and dreams. Wouldn't it be helpful to find out if you have a limiting ray affecting your most cherished goals in life? What about your business or your career? What about in your health? Finding those limiting rays can make a huge difference. Limiting rays prevent us from getting the things we want in life because there's no way we can call in a spectrum that's rich in the color of the limiting ray. Spectrums influence these as much as they do the body and can also be balanced so that you can find greater harmony and happiness in your life. My 3rd introductory course is Color Rays 107, or Main Color Ray Testing. The main color ray is the one color that connects you with your highest knowing. By working with that color, your life can become more purposeful and well-directed. I welcome you to visit my website where you can learn more about color rays in several blog posts that I've written, and also you can find out about the 3 color ray courses. Color Ray 105, Spectrum Balancing Your Body, Color Ray 106, Spectrum Balancing Life Issues, and Color Ray 107, Main Color Ray Testing. Working with the spectrums that comprise your body and being gives you the opportunity to take some control over your health, your wellness, and your healing journey. No longer do you have to feel helpless, that there's nothing you can do, because there is, and it's all natural, it's safe, and it's effective.